Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're taking a deep dive into one of the most discussed, debated, and sometimes misunderstood strategies of Donald Trump's presidency, the peace through strength doctrine. You've probably heard this phrase repeated countless times across speeches, interviews, and social media, but what does it actually mean? Was it just a political slogan designed to sound strong and decisive, or did it reflect a coherent strategy that shaped U.S. national security and influenced global politics in measurable ways? In this video, we're going to go beyond opinions. We will examine official data, military budgets, recorded operations, and public sentiment. By the end, you'll have a complete data-driven understanding of how this strategy functioned, what it achieved, and where it faced limitations. Throughout this video, we'll focus on several critical questions. Was the growth in U.S. military power under Trump effective in preventing conflicts, or did it simply create an arms race? Was the creation of the U.S. Space Force a strategic necessity or primarily symbolic? How did limited military actions, such as the strikes in Syria or the assassination of General Qasem Soleimani, actually impact security and international stability? And finally, how did these policies resonate with the American public, and how did they affect relationships with allies and adversaries? These questions will guide our analysis, keeping us focused on data and real-world consequences. When Trump assumed office in January 2017, the United States already maintained the largest, most technologically advanced military in the world. The Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps were all equipped with state-of-the-art systems, and the nuclear triad provided strategic deterrence that few nations could match. However, the U.S. public was experiencing what analysts call war fatigue. After more than 15 years in Afghanistan and the lingering effects of the Iraq War, citizens and policymakers alike questioned the sustainability and purpose of long-term military engagements abroad. A growing portion of the electorate was wary of sending American troops into prolonged conflicts, and public opinion increasingly favored a strategy that prioritized caution while maintaining security. Against this backdrop, Trump's peace through strength strategy appeared at first glance to be paradoxical. The idea was to build a stronger, modern military to reduce the need for engagement in long-term conflicts. The reasoning was simple yet powerful. By demonstrating overwhelming capability and readiness, potential adversaries would be deterred from aggressive action, thereby reducing the probability of war. In other words, the United States could avoid costly engagements by ensuring that the consequences of confrontation were clear and immediate. This approach required a careful balance, expanding and modernizing military capacity without signaling an intent to wage unnecessary wars, and simultaneously managing public perception to maintain domestic support. One of the most visible indicators of this strategy was the significant increase in the defense budget. Between 2017 and 2020, U.S. military spending rose by tens of billions of dollars, representing one of the fastest periods of growth in modern history. Additional funds were allocated to multiple areas simultaneously: modernization of combat aircraft, expansion of the Navy fleet with new ships and submarines, upgrading missile defense systems, developing unmanned systems, and reinforcing the nuclear triad with next-generation capabilities. The modernization of aircraft and naval vessels alone required careful planning and long-term investment, with contracts stretching over decades, highlighting the strategic intent behind each expenditure. Supporters of the policy argued that a powerful, technologically superior military reduces the risk of war by creating credible deterrent. Critics, however, warned that this rapid growth could trigger a global arms race where other nations accelerate their own military investments in response, potentially increasing geopolitical tensions instead of reducing them. Another highly symbolic and strategic element of Trump's approach was the establishment of the United States Space Force. Space had traditionally been seen as a domain for research and civilian applications, but emerging threats from adversaries like China and Russia made space a critical area for military operations. Satellites are not just tools for communication or navigation. They underpin modern military operations, intelligence collection, and even economic security. By creating a separate branch of the military dedicated to space, Congress and the Trump administration sent a clear signal. The U.S. recognized space as a critical domain for national defense. This decision was met with mixed reactions. Some praised it as a forward-looking adaptation to modern warfare, while others criticized it as a largely symbolic gesture. Nevertheless, the creation of the Space Force was not merely symbolic. It involved budget allocations, institutional development, and long-term planning that positioned the United States to maintain technological and strategic superiority in the decades ahead. When examining real-world application, the Trump era was characterized more by targeted strikes than by large-scale military campaigns. Missile strikes in Syria, the elimination of General Qasem Soleimani in Iran, and operations against terrorist leaders demonstrated the ability of the U.S. to act decisively. These operations were often limited in scale, minimizing long-term troop commitments and political costs, while signaling to adversaries that the U.S. remained capable of forceful action when necessary. This approach reflected the core principle of peace through strength. The visible ability to act forcefully deters aggression without requiring constant engagement. Public reactions were mixed. Polls conducted at the time reflected significant variation, depending on political alignment of respondents and the wording of questions, highlighting the complexity of public opinion on military actions. Interestingly, a central tension of the strategy was the simultaneous pursuit of military buildup and the promise to end endless wars. In Afghanistan and Syria, the Trump administration initiated troop reductions, transferred security responsibilities to local forces, and engaged in discussions regarding long-term withdrawals. On the one hand, the military grew in capacity and readiness. On the other hand, the U.S. reduced its direct involvement in active conflict zones. This dual approach created a nuanced perception domestically and internationally. The U.S. demonstrated capability and resolve while attempting to avoid the long-term political and human costs associated with extended military campaigns. Relations with allies and adversaries were also influenced by this strategy. NATO allies, for instance, were pressured to increase their defense spending, reflecting the principle that security should be a shared responsibility rather than relying solely on the U.S. While this created some friction, it also had a measurable effect. Several NATO members significantly boosted their defense budgets during this period. With adversaries, a combination of pressure and diplomacy was used. Harsh rhetoric toward Iran, North Korea, and China was coupled with economic sanctions, strategic negotiation, and visible demonstrations of military capability. In essence, military strength was used as both a negotiating tool and a deterrent, shaping global perceptions of U.S. resolve. Domestically, approval ratings for these policies were variable. While trust in the military remained high overall, opinions on specific actions often split along partisan lines. Republican voters were generally supportive of increased military spending and assertive foreign policies, whereas Democratic voters expressed concerns over potential escalation and budget priorities. Social media amplified debates but did not reliably represent nationwide opinion. The differences between polls highlight the importance of interpreting trends over isolated data points and of considering context when evaluating public sentiment. Internationally, U.S. military expansion under Trump prompted responses from both allies and rivals. NATO partners increased their defense spending, while other major powers accelerated the modernization of their own forces. This illustrates the tangible impact of U.S. strategy on global military calculations. Although the U.S. avoided new large-scale wars during this period, the shifts in military balance and the expansion into new domains, including cyber and space, created additional layers of strategic complexity. Looking at measurable outcomes, the strategy clearly strengthened U.S. military capabilities. The Navy, Air Force, Nuclear Triad, and newly formed Space Force all reflect concrete investment and planning. Limited military actions demonstrated capability without prolonged engagement. However, whether this increase in power directly translated to global stability is a more complex question.
A powerful military can prevent some conflict, but it can also provoke responses from other powers, creating new forms of competition and uncertainty. Long-term consequences are already emerging. Programs in naval modernization, aviation, space capabilities, cyber and advanced technologies are designed to last for decades. Their true impact will unfold over time, influenced by the policies of other nations and global geopolitical dynamics. Monitoring these programs provides insight into how sustained investment in military strength can shape global power dynamics for years ahead. In conclusion, Trump's peace through strength strategy was far more than a simple slogan. It was expressed through substantial increases in the defense budget, modernization of the military, creation of new institutions like the Space Force, and carefully targeted military operations. The data confirms that U.S. military power significantly grew during this period. However, the relationship between that strength